to help you fix the 10 most common serger problems people run into. Hi, I'm Sarah from sewingmastery.com, and this week I have been working on the free video tutorials for the Bernat B62, B64, and B68 airlock sergers and serger and cover stitch machines. We're the ones that do free video tutorials on many different sewing machines, embroidery machines, and sergers. Plus we have online courses to help you master your machine to higher levels once you've mastered the basics. But today I have 10 very common questions I get asked, my students ask, we get emailed of serger questions, problems, and how to troubleshoot them before people make a trip to their service center. Whether you're a brand new serger owner or you've had sergers in the past and now upgraded to some of the newer, more fancier air-threaded sergers that are available, and to tell you the truth, a lot more affordable options for easy threading. But it still comes down to knowing some basics. So when troubles arise, and you know, we usually are serging all by ourselves. There's not a lot of people that we can just turn to and go, hey, why did this happen? So hopefully this will help some people. And if your serger has thrown a tantrum lately, list it in the comments and let me know how you fixed it, or which one of these tips was the best one that you didn't know about. And hopefully in the future, you won't have any of these problems going forward. So I was lucky enough to start working at a sewing machine store when I was 15 and a half. I remember that day when I started. I rode my bike from high school to the sewing machine store and started a career that I had no idea would take me to this very point. I mention this because even though I was an avid sewer at that time, I did not own a serger, but I quickly realized there were sergers right next to sewing machines back in the day that were, for me, just a brand new toy to play with. So quickly figuring out how to thread it, how to use it. It was actually quite easy for me because I didn't have any preconceived ideas. I just was taught how to do it, and that always worked. So word spread that the new girl at the sewing machine store would rethread your serger if you needed help. So the little old ladies would come in and they would say, Sarah, will you rethread my serger? You know, maybe change it from black thread to white thread. And when you're 15, you say yes to the little old ladies and you sit down and you change it out, and maybe you're chatting a little bit with them and seeing what they're sewing on. And then about the third time I did this, I'm like, wait a minute. Can I just show you how to do this? It's really not that hard. And that's how I started teaching serger classes as a teenager. And I've been doing it ever since. And the same things that they were running into are the same things that happen today. Yes, sergers have gotten a lot easier, and threading is a breeze if you have one of the newer air-threaded sergers, which, by the way, these do and have made my filming so much easier because I could just go from stitch to stitch and it's not taking as long, which is really quite a treat from years ago. So if you haven't looked at new sergers lately, set some time aside to go visit your local store and try them out. They're also a lot quieter, and some of the newer features might be something that you've been missing that would really help add some benefits to maybe some of the ways that you've been doing things now that could be easier in the future. Number one, I can't say this enough, but quality thread makes a huge difference in a serger. So I'm going to put links below to some quality thread that you can get your hands on. I usually reach for the Mettler Cerakote. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive, but I don't have time to be frustrated. Or maybe you have a really basic serger. If you put some good quality thread on it, it is actually going to run smoother and be less frustrating. I'll still never forget, and this has happened multiple times when I worked at the retail store. People would come in with their serger, usually kind of like, in a panic and needing some help. And I know exactly what they need. They just needed somebody to sit down, rethread it, and get them back on track. They've probably tried to rethread it themselves. It's probably gotten more frustrating as the time went on. The first thing I can usually spot on that serger when they've brought it in is if it has 4 black threads or 4 red threads. I already know that often that they have picked low quality black or red thread. Why do I bring up red and black thread? It's a very harshly dyed thread, and so that extra dye, if it on a low quality thread, will just cause havoc. If you're ever testing out new thread, select the black or red and put it through its paces. That's what we did over all the years as we test new threads that come to the market. Some black threads are even products of being over-dyed or dyed twice, and that extra dye can really not make a thread be as quality as it could be. So if you do know that you've just got some thread that you've been hanging on to, but you know it's not good quality, I give you permission to set it aside. Let's buy some good quality thread to replace it, and you'll never miss those older Serger thread cones. If it's been a while since you've had your Serger service, and I'm gonna say Sergers do kind of get the short end of everything. They kind of get a little neglected. We pull them out, we use them hard, and then we put them away. And then a couple years go by and it hasn't either been run or it hasn't been serviced. So do keep that in mind. Why don't you think back when the last time you had it serviced, or ever. Go give it the spa day it deserves at your local sewing machine service center. Trust me, if you want to use it more and it's running in top condition, it will be such a delight to use, and you'll look for new projects to use it on. Number 3, if you hear when you're serging something rubbing, maybe a little click, click, well, the needles and the loopers are so close together. They're like knitting needles, and as they come together to create that overlock, the distance is so fine. So as you've been using it, if the needles have gotten bent a little bit and they start rubbing against the loopers, all you need to do is start by changing the needles. And I say needles, plural, so let's go ahead, take both needles out and put 2 new needles. Now you do need to make sure you're using the correct needles for your brand of serger. Yes, there are some brands that take specific serger needles. And for example, in our store, we actually usually keep the serger needles of those specialty kind of in the back, away from people accidentally picking up the wrong pack. I would hate for someone to pick up a random serger needle pack and then put it in their sewing machine, because they are that different. If you're unsure, double check what needles you take with your serger and stock up on a few extra packs so you never run out. If you're wondering about the quilts that are behind me, they are from a couple of our most popular online courses. One is our Stitching Cosmos online course. That is to master all the sewing stitches, functions, features, and accessory feet for your sewing machine. So there's no embroidery in that particular one. And this one is up because it is one of our newer online courses to help you master rehooping. So whether you have a Husqvarna Viking with design positioning, a Pfaff with precise positioning, or Bernina with pinpoint placement, that course is a 20 hooping course that will help you master those amazing functions built into your machines. We'll put links below to both of these courses for you to check out, because there are free lessons that you can watch to see if that course is right for you. Next, you're going to notice that when you go to replace your 2 needles, another common problem that people run into is they don't get them high enough up into the needle holder. So make sure that you bring that screw out, push that needle up as high as it'll go, and then tighten it down. You'll notice if you are using 2 needles for a 4-thread overlock, the left needle is always higher than the right needle. So if you glance at your needles and notice they're at the same height, you definitely need to stop, because one of them isn't at the highest position. I've also run into, there are some sergers that at the top where the needle screws are, there's actually only 1 screw, meaning as you loosen it, both the needles are going to come out. And I know it makes it kind of awkward as you try to put both needles up and you're trying to get that one a little bit higher than the other one, and then hold them and then tighten it all down. But I have also had that where you have tightened the needles down and they're not even, meaning as you tighten the screw, it actually like bends it, because there's only 1 screw, and not bends it, but just tilts it. And what's going to happen is it's not going to line up where that needle needs to be, especially if you're using like just the right needle or just the left needle. So just be very aware that as you are tightening that single screw, that if you see the needle kind of start to not be straight up and down, that you need to adjust it just slightly so it is not tightened and tilted. This next one's going to talk more about your threading habits. So when you thread your machine down through the tension dials, number 1, always have your presser foot up when you do this. Now, I know on some sergers, when you lift the presser foot up, the tension discs actually do not open, but a lot of the new ones do. So to make it easier, if your presser foot is up when you're threading the machine, and when you put the thread all the way down in those tension discs, if you give it that little floss back and forth, it'll make sure it goes all the way nice and deep. So when you do put your presser foot down, just like your sewing machine, it becomes tight, and then that's the tension actually working on that thread. Now back to having your machine serviced. Over time, if you haven't had your machine serviced, those tension discs after use, and then especially too, I know a lot of us don't put covers over our serger, so lint in the air or pet hair, other things can settle down in those tension discs and kind of just make them a little grimy. And so what's going to happen is as you're serging, you will find that your thread that was deep into the tension disc actually rides on out, and before you know it, you can actually see, you can tell something's different because number one, it looks different on your fabric. And number two, you can almost hear the difference. The thread is not in the tension disc. So if that happens, you can start by just kind of giving this a little tug and kind of resetting it back in there. But if that's happening, it's time to probably have your machine serviced so they can get in and clean out all those delicate parts. Now I have this actually on my list at number 10, but since we're talking about it, I told you lift your presser foot up when you are threading. On a lot of sergers, it will actually sew with the presser foot up. And what happens is if you're actually working on some very thick fabric, so like 2 layers of fleece, or maybe you're going over something and there's 3 layers or 4 layers of something, it's actually really hard to tell that the presser foot is up and you're getting some weird stitches. Maybe it's not feeding. Well, it's not feeding because there's no pressure holding the fabric against the teeth that are trying to pull it through. But I have that happen often in my serger classes, so I know this is very, very common. So I try to get people to, when I say lift up the presser foot, is to, as soon as you're done, put it back down. So I would rather that you almost lift up the front toe to get something underneath than lift up the presser foot. There's a time and place depending on your project, but that way you don't accidentally lift it up, look down, think it's down, and then try to serge, and then realize you have to do it again. So sewing with the presser foot up is a common thing, and it's a quick fix. Let's talk cutting width. Now this is one on a serger that's a little hard to grasp because it's based on the thickness of fabric you're working on, and different fabrics have different looks depending on which stitch. But you can actually adjust where that blade is closest to the needles or further out. So there's usually a knob somewhere around here that you can actually move that in or out. So what happens is when you see loops of thread hanging off the edge of your fabric, it's not a tension issue, and that's a common question. The thing is all we need to do is move the knife further away from the needles to leave more fabric in the overlock area. It just needs to be filled in. Now here's the trick. If you're unsure, and this is a setting that's kind of hard for you to grasp, you have a 50-50 shot. So if you turn the knob one way and it gets worse, you now know to turn it the opposite way, and it will probably get better. All right, which leads to the next thing. Knives do get dull. And what dulls a serger knife is usually when we're working and cutting through fabric that is not a natural fiber. So as we start to work with polyester, if you've ever noticed when you've cut polyester with a rotary cutter or scissors, you will find that it will dull your scissors or blades quicker. Same with a serger knife. And you'll probably notice that when you opened up your serger, a lot of sergers come with a spare blade. So it's not like you're needing to do this quite often. You literally run it until it's just not cutting anymore, usually much further than you should have. But you're going to start to notice it's just not giving you that smooth cut as you used to have from before. As soon as you change the knife, you're probably going to see a huge difference. I've also seen it where fabric just doesn't want to feed as evenly because what's happening is the knife is trying to cut, but it's not cutting as well. So it's resisting how the feed dogs can pull it through. So it's kind of, there's like a little balance in there. So as soon as you change the knife, you will probably be back to smooth stitching and feeding of your fabric. The other thing that can damage a knife is, oh no, if you serge through a pin. It would be like taking your scissors and just cutting a pin right there, and then you have a nick in your blades. So if that ever happens, well, number one, the little wonder clips are great with doing sergers, but you can also pin parallel to your edge versus perpendicular. We're used to pinning perpendicular like when we sew, because then you can sew up to the pin and then take it out. Yes, I know a lot of you sew over your pins, but on a serger, get in the habit to putting your pins parallel, and if you put it so the points point away from you, when you get to them, you can pull them out, or you can just serge right past them. So especially if you're pinning like an inch from the edge, you could just go through, serge it all the way up, and then pull your pins out when you're done. So whatever is most efficient for you. This is a common one. A lot of sergers have what we call a stitch finger that you kind of pull back when you go to a rolled hem, and then you have to push it back in to create a natural 4-thread, 3-thread overlock stitch. Now, if that stitch finger, which by the way, it's usually like a little button right up front that you pull towards you, there might even be an R on your throat plate, mine does, for rolled hem. And so what happens often is that people will get all excited to do some rolled hemming. Maybe they're doing some napkins, or maybe they're doing something on a hem of a dress. They get all done, and usually that's about where they leave their serger, and off they go. They put the dress on, or they're off to the party. What happens is usually there's a time gap between the rolled hem and when you get back to your serger. And if you've left that stitch finger out and you switch it back to a normal 4-thread overlock, the most common stitch, you'll find it doesn't look as perfect or as full as it used to. And that's because the stitch finger is not there to support the stitch. So what I try to tell my new students, until they kind of get the hang of things, is when they switch to rolled hem, is to put a big old sticky note on the front of the serger, push stitch finger back in when done, or leave a note, last thing you did was a rolled hem, make sure to put the stitch finger in. And that is going to help save you a ton of frustration, because I find myself usually using a serger a couple times a year. I'm not using it all the time. So by leaving it, you're forgetting like what the last project was. So leave yourself a little note until you can get used to recognizing what a stitch looks like if you haven't put that stitch finger back into place. Here's a simple one, but sometimes just kind of forgettable. A lot of sergers these days have it where if the door isn't completely closed, the serger will not run. So if something is blocking that or not in place, or if you have some accessories that hide in the front part, which by the way are so handy, that's a new thing on a lot of sergers, is the common ones I use are right. So if they don't get put away perfectly and you close this door and it doesn't close, the foot control doesn't run, and you're like, why isn't my serger running? But there is a mechanism that actually allows the serger to run when the door is closed correctly. So you can kind of feel where that is, but if you run into that issue, that is actually a common thing. So just make sure that it's closed so your machine can run. So to recap, just a few common things: thread, changing your needles, and having your serger serviced. About the same as what you would do for your sewing machine. So if you do own a serger, let's take care of it as well, if not better, than the sewing machine you use every day. I'll put links below to the videos that we're doing on this series of machines, but you'll also find at sewingmastery.com a list of all the machines that we have filmed free video tutorials for, and all the serger models that are included. Remember, if these videos have been helpful, make sure you click like and leave us a comment what has been a frustrating thing about your serger and what you did to fix it. Since I happen to be working with a Bernina serger, I'm going to just quick show that there are 2 wonderful accessory books: the Big Book of Serger Quilting and the Big Book of Serging. So if you really want 2 different encyclopedias for your serger at your fingertips, go to your local Bernina store and check those out. And if you're looking for online courses for serger projects, I'm going to put a link below to Craftsy and my most favorite Craftsy serger projects. I actually have a Craftsy class there as well that are perfect to help you explore more about how and where to use your serger and cover stitch machines. Happy serging!